All right, y'all. So jumping back in, it is freezing. I just turned my heater on, but it's freezing. This weather has been insane. A lot of crazy things going on in the world. All right, natural resources as causes of violent conflict. Universal history. The term history generally refers to the field of study of past events that have involved humans. It is often restricted to the period after writing appeared, and written records could be found to provide proof of the occurrence of specific events, although clearly many documents, past and present, are not truthful. Thank you for acknowledging that. Events that occurred before the invention of writing are sometimes classified as prehistory. Such ancient events can nevertheless be reconstructed from archaeological evidence, human remains, and remains of human artifacts. But history is more than just uncovering past events. Serious students of history harbor the desire to understand why historical events unfolded in the way that they did. Yeah, I'm going to interject because I'm observing something about myself that I've stated a few times throughout my life, but it still boggles my mind. So when it comes to like mathematics and this sort of logical processing of information and problem solving, I really suck at the simple stuff like arithmetic, right? And a lot of that really just has to do with memorization anyway, and following, it's all following rules and stuff. But when it comes to intricate systems like, trig and calculus and geometry and all the things, I'm pretty good with that. Throw me a Pythagorean theorem, like, I don't know what that is actually. I don't get it. I really don't. And my mom used to be so confused too. I'm good at that. I don't know what that is. So with reading too and understanding stuff, like I need to be exposed to challenging stuff. And I'm going to be reading through it very fast in order for it to actually like work in my mind. When I have to process things slower, I'd be like, like, I don't know what that is. And then, of course, knowing that I have an audience, like I'm talking to this computer, makes me stumble and trip up on stuff too. But it's like my brain is flipped in that regard. Like where most people, and it's weird too, because when it comes to like social things, I tend to process on the back end. I don't like to say slowly because I'm not inept in social settings. Like I do fairly well. The way that my personality and stuff and my quirks like show up the way that they do, just the difference of me being a unique individual. But and people can probably discern that, but in group settings, especially because I grew up performing like pretty much all my life until I was 10. So, and I've never been like shy in that regard and performing in front of hundreds of people, and whether it was tap dancing or ballet or whatever, or performing a poem or whatever, like I've done pretty good. I've since developed a lot of anxiety around that, but I don't know. What I'm trying to say is the processing on the back end with social interactions is just because, masking is certainly a huge component of having ADHD or any sort of neurodivergency. So we're really just trying to survive the moment in the world and having to, unfortunately, no, I'm playing, interact with other human beings and other people. And sometimes that's more of an inconvenience and task or chore than when it's not. And so, I'm just showing up trying to be what I need to be in this moment to make it through this moment. Any sort of slight or innuendo or whatever. But that's the thing too, because I'm also very charismatic. And so I don't know. There are moments where I might miss certain cues or whatever. But for the most part, like I tend to control conversation because I found that is an easy way from not giving y'all all the tea on me. Jeesh. That is how I found to be a little more confident and comfortable. And I'm a communicator, right? Like I'm a talker. And so I do also value, though, very much so. I'm very much, more leaning more toward introversion than anything. But so I do value silence and solitude. Whereas for some people, I've met people in my life where that even the thought of being alone for as long as I can be alone is torturous. Like it's crazy to think about, let alone to experience. I've met people in my life who literally would cry to talk about or think about not like living alone or not being in a relationship, all the like where they're like engaged in interacting with that particular person or those people. I'm not just saying like a romantic situation. I mean relationships in general, like human connection and interacting. And we are a species designed for that, so we definitely need it. But I've literally met people where it's like, oh my God, that sounds like hell on earth, to not literally wake up every day and interact with someone. And I'm just like, the opposite is true for me. Like, that's craziness. People are great, don't get me wrong, but ooh, it's too much. And so, yeah, it's really funny to me because, like, a lot of my processing for certain things happens after the fact. And I think, too, just being neurodivergent and also very cerebral and intellectual, I tend to, like, just a very sapient person, I tend to, like, of course, that's the term they put out there, but overthink, right? To me, it's just thinking. And in some cases, thinking deep. Because I know the extremes that my ability to analyze something can go. Okay? And so on an average day, even if I am up top in my mind a lot and kind of not necessarily grounded all the time or in the moment, which again, shout out to my herbal allies and prayer and righteous meditation, but because it is important, to be mindful and to have a level of groundedness, especially in the work that I do. But I enjoy the time floating in oblivion as well. Like, I enjoy the time in my mind, and that is necessary for me to express and to exist and to function. Has it worked against me? Sure. But, I don't know. I don't think it to be necessarily a bad thing. Now, obviously, it can show up in ways that are, not the best. But being that I am someone who processes life and my experiences in it through, like, intellectualizing them, which is also not always a good thing. I understand it, It's just a necessary part of how I process, of how I function. It just is what it is, And so, yeah, it's so interesting. It really is. Because I'm trying, y'all can't sense that or hear that or feel that, but I am trying my best to not just read through this crazy fast. And to some people, it may not be crazy fast. Y'all might be like, girl, relax. It is not that serious. It's not that, whatever. I'm not thinking of myself to be special because of that. It's an interesting thing for me to observe and how much I'm trying to temper how I'm reading this out of consideration for the fact that people are going to be consuming, this content as well. And so then that just brought up memories about, like, the way that I process information and knowledge and interact with it, If you experience something like that, if you know what the heck it is that I'm talking about, if you understand, leave a comment below. Let me know. All right, anyway, let's jump back into this. So right here, serious students of history harbor the desire to understand why historical events unfolded in the way that they did. In scientific terms, they are interested in understanding the mechanisms involved in bringing about specific historical events, or put simply, identifying causes of events. Jared Diamond, in his book Guns, Germs, and Steel, I need to read that, which is basically a book about human history on planet Earth in the last 13,000 years, nothing more but nothing less either, expressed his wish that human history became a scientific field of study and not, as the common sentiment is today, something unapproachable by the scientific method. While some scientific procedures, such as the radioactive carbon dating technique, have now been widely accepted by historians, a term used here to include also archaeologists, anthropologists. So then I guess in a way I am sort of a historian. Oh my gosh, I kind of am, y'all. Like, I'm literally studying medical anthropology and also ethnobotanical systems. So in a way, I am a historian. but not in the traditional sense. Anyway, in several other related disciplines, there have been two main arguments against using the scientific method of gathering preliminary data, forming hypotheses about mechanisms, and testing their prediction in historical research. The first is that, and I've got my own opinions and issues with the scientific method, but that's a conversation for another day. The first is that the subject is just too complex, so that every historical event is sui generis. Let's look this up. It's all right. It's a big word. Two words coming together to form a phrase that we are not familiar with, and that's all right. We look things up on this channel with no shame. Sui generis is how you say that. It's Latin, of course. Of its own kind, to describe something unique, original. The result of a unique set of previous constellations. The result of a unique set of a previous constellation of events that constitute the causes of the present event under study, and therefore no general methods can be applied to its study and no general conclusions can be drawn from such study. The second objection is that humans have free will, and therefore human history is not, indeed cannot be, deterministic. Human choices made this history happen is a typical comment. A specific variation of the complexity, cum sui juris, argument is the concept of great men in history, quote unquote. This concept posits that the personalities of charismatic leaders cause certain historical events. That is, the leaders' personalities are the root cause of their behavior. The great men concept, which of course includes some great women as well, does not necessarily deny that human personalities are shaped by both their genes and their environment, although people often vehemently disagree on the proportional contribution of nature and nurture. However, while the lives of such great men are fertile grounds for biographers, attempts to understand exactly how biological, environmental, and cultural factors contributed to human events by shaping the personalities of movers and shakers of human affairs and every other person in society are generally discouraged by historians, given the multiplicity of such factors and the enormous complexity of their interactions. In essence, historians, both those emphasizing the actions of singular people as well as those inclined to give more weight to the actions of the multitudes, limit their study to proximate causes of historical events. And this is a sort of anthropologic term here, proximate, so more closely related to those peoples impacted, or the multitudes rather. The direct action of people, and in different contexts this can kind of transform in meaning, but yeah. And refrain from studying how each person at the time that his or her action under study occurred or themselves caused or came into being by previous events. Sorry, I had to take a sip of tea. All right. And we'll I think I do want to delve into my anthropology course from last semester, where we did look at a lot of like ultimate and proximate causes to certain things. Ultimate kind of being the opposite of proximate. So something that's a little more basically scaled out or zoomed out, this bird's eye view of different things, or more distant. So for an example, if you think about social determinants or political determinants or just determinants to the health of a particular group of people in one specific environment, say the ghettos, right, or the projects, which as the name implies, they were projects. We're going to talk about that in another video, an experiment of sorts, right? It's more proximate to kind of look at like the day-to-day lives of those individuals and the issues that they face within that particular community and how those things impact their health. And then to look at some of the legislation or some of the policies that impact that community is a more ultimate viewpoint, right? It's kind of more distant or getting further away, but it still has an impact on those particular people. All right. So in short, whether attributing the cause of historical events to a few prominent individuals or to popular movements, historians generally avoid studying causes of causes at too many steps removed. But by not pursuing root causes, historians are unable to draw general conclusions that will point to the operation of natural laws, an outcome that historians often appear to approve of rather than lament, which is why I say, because that kind of is the point for anthropologists anyway, and some archaeologists, is to really look at causes of causes. It's not everything, but, and that's why I think it's a little different than like a historian in general. Anyway, all right. An outcome that historians often appear to approve of rather than lament. Thus, y'all know these names be jacking me up. So I'm just going to skip over that. Conclude. I want to say, Thucydides, but that doesn't even feel right. That the real ultimate cause of the Peloponnesian War was not the specific military incident that preceded it, but instead what made the war inevitable was the growth of the Athenian power and the fear which this caused in Sparta. Is sometimes admired as a stroke of analytical genius, but is as often derided as a presumptuous and unbecoming statement from a historian. Overall, the pervasive impression from present-day historical research is that history is not deterministic, but is rather a stoicistic, random process, and therefore the history cannot be predicted or even retroactively explained by any scientific methodology. I don't agree with that. As Diamond points out, there are several well-established scientific disciplines that have a major historical component, such as astronomy, geology, and of course, biology. What they all have in common is having as their subjects of study complex systems that keep changing their states because of previous actions. Oxygen molecules are the same now as they will be in a million years from now, and will behave the same way in response to other chemicals. We don't know that for sure, but okay, depending on temperature, pressure, etc. At both times, and therefore a simple equation can predict their behavior anytime. On the other hand, any living being or another animal, a plant, or even a bacterium is a complex system that changes from one minute to another. And I'm just saying we don't know that because, of course, since time immemorial, these things have behaved the way that they have, and we understand what we understand because of that. But we can't 100% make that statement as an ultimate truth simply because, we can't predict the future. We don't know what could potentially happen, especially when, and most scientists don't, but when you understand and believe that there are entities and powers outside of our realm that are governed by completely different rules. All right, anyway. Let's see, where was I? Because each constantly carries out biochemical reactions that change its chemical composition, internal structures, external shape, temperature, etc., and therefore will not behave the same way over time. A geological formation such as a mountain also changes over time, for example, by erosion. So its properties and behavior, ergo how it retains heat or deflects wind, will also change over time. Nevertheless, leaving human beings aside for the moment, all scientists treat such complex systems, both inanimate and living, as systems that can be studied by the application of the scientific method, so that their behavior in the past can be explained mechanistically and their future behavior can in principle be predicted, giving sufficient knowledge. For all these systems, the concept of free will does not apply, and so any observed situation in these areas of study is thought of as the outcome of the deterministic processes, the end result of a chain of causes and effects. Such chains of events are indeed often extremely complicated, and therefore present conditions of a given system often defy, for now, complete mechanistic explanations, and futures states of such systems are often not amenable to accurate predictions. For example, atmospheric scientists still do not understand well why specific ice ages occurred when they did and how they played out, and they cannot predict the occurrence of the next ice age and its particular length and severity, nor can geologists predict with any accuracy when and where earthquakes would occur or their strength. However, these shortcomings are attributed simply to the lack of sufficient information as well as the inability to conceptually and technically analyze all the data already available. The argument that these issues are simply not amenable to the scientific method is not entertained by any serious scientist. Although a general scientific definition of complexity does not yet exist, a strong argument can be made that living organisms constitute the most complex systems on Earth in the sense that they are made up of the largest number of distinct parts, tens of thousands of unique genes, proteins, and metabolites that interact with each other in multiple ways. Before Darwin published his book on the origin of species in 1859, in which he promulgated the principle of biological evolution by natural selection, the descriptive study of living organisms, their components, and their interactions with each other was called natural history. This term is still sometimes used in this way, and we kind of saw that in Pliny's work. For example, in the designation of natural history museums, while the study of the interactions among living organisms with each other and with the environment has evolved into the scientific discipline called ecology. Once the validity of the process of biological evolution was established, the term natural history came to describe, in addition to the aspects detailed in the original definition, also the study of the origins, evolution, and interrelationships of organisms. By that extended definition, human history is clearly a subfield of both natural history and ecology. To be sure, for most people, the motives for studying ecological systems that do not include people versus studying those that do are fundamentally different. Even ecologists don't really want to write a book of 1,000 pages describing how a geographical area with its myriad plants, animals, and microbes change from year to year from, say, 500 BC to 500 AD. At best, they want to learn the principles that govern changes in such a system, so we can use this information to predict ecological changes today. But if this geographical area was the British Isles and we were historians, we would likely try to record all major events and some minor ones that occurred there and involved humans during this time. We will note some changes to the system as a whole, for example, deforestation and the gradual elimination of many non-domesticated animal species, but only because humans were the causative agent, or so we imagine, and because such changes had in turn an effect on human affairs later on. Random natural events such as earthquakes, floods, or droughts, or these acts of God, will also be noted, but again, only for their effects on humans and would therefore be labeled as natural disasters. Basically, we would define our interest as human history, not ecology, and in the interest of our readers, would most likely be based simply on the need to relate to their own ancestors if they are British, or to generally satisfy their curiosity about the past of our conspecifics, not to mention political needs such as establishing national standing and territorial claims. All right. A scientific, understanding of human history, abstracting the roles from specific cases, is not the major driving force in conducting historical research and writing it up, nor in reading historical research. But as I argue in this book, a scientific understanding of human history is not possible when the roles of all other components in the ecological system are minimized or completely ignored, and humans are considered as the sole causative agents of any action. Besides the claim insurmountability of the complexity problem, the second objection to making human history part of the scientific discipline of natural history, as mentioned earlier, is the idea of free will, which sometimes goes together with the blanket denial of any biological basis for human behavior. As noted above, humans as well as other living organisms are complex systems that are constantly changing. The cells that make up the human body grow and divide and sometimes die in response to both genetic and environmental cues. Information from the body itself and from outside the body is obtained by the nervous system and is stored in the brain, which undergoes physiological and chemical changes in response to these inputs. Given the complexity of the system, it is indeed difficult to predict what output a given input will elicit. Fair enough, but the concept of free will claims something fundamentally different. The concept of free will posits that output, human action, is independent of input, or, to put it another way, given a single defined input, multiple output choices are possible. If correct, it means that a person can somehow choose his action unconstrained by the condition of his brain, whose chemical and physiological state at the I froze because I was just thinking about the discussion post with Ira Harker and addiction and kind of what I was stating for my perspective and argument of that. Anyway, state that at the time the choices made had been determined. Sorry, let me reread this because I jacked this up. If correct, it means that a person can somehow choose his action unconstrained by the conditions of his brain, whose chemical and physiological state at the time the choices made have been determined by the interactions of all past inputs up to and including the said input with the hardware. Interesting. This concept is obviously at odds with the basic physical laws of nature, denying as it does that there is a physical cause and only a physical cause for each action, and has therefore been refuted by scientists beginning with ancient Greeks. Nevertheless, the belief in free will is pervasive among laymen and even scientists. And I believe in free will. I believe that outside of what scientists have sought to explain about the laws of nature and motion and what have you, there are components to our existence, more spiritual than anything, that can override and supersede those rules or those laws. With the concept of free will disposed of, there is really no reason why, in principle, human history should not become a subdiscipline in both scientific fields of ecology and natural history. Perhaps this approach has been most closely adapted by those anthropologists who call themselves social biologists. I'm going to stop there. We'll pick back up on the next part. Like, comment, subscribe, share. Thank y'all for tuning in. And see y'all. Well, I ain't seeing none of y'all, but we'll jump back in a bit.